Hello and welcome back to my model railroad. I wanted to share with you some of the layouts that I designed as well as the one that I believe I'm going to pick and just wanted to get some feedback. Unfortunately, I don't have any screen capture software, so this is just going to be some pictures with me talking in the background, which is pretty much what my videos are anyway. For starters, let me go into the requirements for my layouts. I wanted to have 3 nested loops, all so that way I can run 3 trains at the same time and walk away and not have to worry about it if I have to leave the room and the trains were still running. Also wanted to have a full rail yard with an arrival track and a departure track, a yard lead, a couple of classification tracks, and then even a roundhouse. Other things that I was trying to do was to minimize the amount of raised track in the front of the layout because I was afraid that it was going to block my view, and also wanted to have that if there was a turnout on the main line, in which case there will be several, that the main line train will run through the non-turned out part of the turnout, so straight on through a regular straight turnout. I've heard that if you regularly run trains through the turned out portion of the turnout, you're more likely to get derailments. So on this first one here, you can see I've color-coded it a little bit based on where each track would be servicing. I'm always going to call the outermost loop track 1, the middle one track 2, and the one closest to the center track 3. So here you can see track 1. It's a little complicated to follow, but if you can see, if you start right around the rail yard, or right at the departure of the rail yard, kind of just to the north of the roundhouse, you'll see that it services the blue squares. It would climb slowly as you traverse clockwise from the left-hand side of the layout. It would climb all along the back of the layout, and then as it goes across, you'll see that it goes through this section of raised bridge. I've hatched it so that way it's you can tell that it's a raised section, and then it would actually travel down this spiraled mountain and actually end up going underneath before coming back up all the way in the front of the right-hand side, and continue servicing all those blue houses, and then running down past through the rail yard again. Track number 2, the red track, would service everything at what I'm going to call sea level. It stays at sea level until you get to the right-hand side of the layout, where then it starts to climb, so that way track 2 can cross over track 1, and then very quickly declines and goes back to sea level, so that way it can dip under track 3. Track 3 services the yellow, and as you can see, it's elevated all along the front of the layout, which I was concerned about it blocking my view, and dips down in the rear of the layout. What I liked about track 3 is it actually runs the opposite direction of track 1 around the helix, while also gaining altitude. So train 1, track 1 is going to rotate counterclockwise down through the helix or the mountain, while track 3 would run clockwise up through the helix. I like this layout for its complexity. I was afraid about building it. It's a little too twisty-turny, and I was also concerned that there really just wasn't that much opportunity to just see the train. Right in the back of the layout, all the tracks are, the track 1 and track 3 are raised, track 2 is not. You pretty much wouldn't be able to see it. And also, as I watch other people's layouts, I always thought it was really, really cool to see a bunch of trains kind of all running parallel past each other or in line with each other. And it just didn't really get that effect with this layout, or I'm afraid I won't. I do like how there's some, change of elevation, and there's some tunnels, and I really did like the idea of that helix or that mountain. But I don't think I'm going to build this layout, and I'm instead going to trade it for my second one, which I'll show you next. So here's my next layout. This is the layout I think I'm going to build. As you can see, one of the most immediate differences is I move the rail yard, instead of being on an angle, to the right-hand side of the layout, up close to the user, so that way the user can get in there and operate all the switch tracks and the turnouts. Yard lead's a little bit smaller. Classification tracks are a little bit smaller. My arrival and departure tracks are a decent size, albeit they are on a curve, which might be a challenge. In this instance, the only track that I have elevated at all is track 1. and it elevates from right around the midpoint of the layout towards the left side. You can see where it's hatched, that's it increasing in elevation until all the way on the left-hand side it's completely elevated, and then it will slowly decrease in elevation. And I actually right now have it going through a mountain kind of on the back right-hand side as a tunnel, so that way, adds a little bit of character to track 1. Track 2, not a whole lot to say on track 2. It goes, through the mountain on the left-hand side and then through another mountain on the right-hand side. Track 3, I really liked the idea of having a train run anti-parallel to the other two. I thought about elevating it and then having it cross under itself. However, I was a little concerned that then there'd be just a very large section of the track that was elevated, which either wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for the layout or would, hide too many of the trains behind it. So right now the idea is just use a crossing to just make a figure 8 shape for track 3. Like I said, it wasn't something I originally thought I was going to like, but I think I like what it'll let me do better for the layout. Also, in order to save space, instead of working with a lot of single crossovers like I showed in my previous layout, I've also switched over to not a plug-and-play double crossover, but a double crossover that's made up of 4 number 6 turnouts, and then also a crossing. It might be a little tricky to wire, but it will definitely save some space. Things I really like about this layout is I do get some nice long runs where the trains can run parallel or anti-parallel. I also like that I do have some tunnels. I think it'll help me add some scenery to the train a little bit. What I don't like is it is a little bit too straight in some spots, especially just right around the rail yard, and also right around where you can see that I've cut the access hole. I'm a little worried that it's going to look like I'm just missing a Christmas tree, because at this point it does just look like a giant loop. I also don't have the tracks crossing over each other at any point. I had toyed around with the idea of changing track 1 and track 2, and having track 1 go through the tunnel on the left-hand side, and having track 2 be the one that climbs over track 1. But that would mean that I'd have to move the crossing point right around where that little neck down is on the left-hand side, kind of right next to that the corner of that green square, which the green square is supposed to represent me, but it turns out I can actually scrunch a little bit smaller than that in order to get into some of these scuttle holes or access holes. And so I was a little worried about having track 2 climb too quickly and basically blocking the back half of the layout. I might still go and change that, based on if anybody has some comments or some feedback, or whether or not that would be a good idea. But I think right now I'm actually just going to leave the tracks independent. What I do like about this layout also is it does allow me to still add another track if I wanted to, say, run an elevated trolley line and get some real tight 15-inch radius curves. Everything on this layout, just like my previous layout, is a minimum of 18-inch radius curves. I would still have room to either run just a shuttle trolley back and forth from the left to the right, or add a very, very tight trolley line, or maybe some type of branch line where it only runs smaller locomotives, so that way they could make a 15-inch radius turn. But anyway, these are the 2 layouts I'm looking at. I know it's not super exciting or super visual to see, just staring at the picture without me at least kind of explaining the parts. But I figured most people out there seem to have a lot more experience than I do, and are probably a lot better reading plans than I am. Any feedback is greatly appreciated. I'm a little concerned that my rail yard is a little too small, but I do like the idea that it's nice and close to the user. I think it'll be a lot more functional than putting it towards the back of the layout. But anyway, thanks for stopping by, and I hope to see you again soon.